jump over to a virtual machine that I have Microsoft Dynamics GP, as well as what we call our MetaViewer Fast Track solution loaded in that virtual machine. We do actually work and integrate very tightly with all versions of Microsoft Dynamics. Obviously, I have to pick one to show today, so I actually just happened to pick the GP one here. So the Fast Track solution, really what that is, since there was a lot of interest in AP automation and invoice processing in particular, we used to historically install everything from scratch, and we found that that was taking a lot of time. So we built this Fast Track solution, which is a best practices approach to AP. So when my guys, they install the software, they install this Fast Track solution as well. It prompts them for what is the name of where's your Microsoft Dynamics system, and then immediately you have a working solution that's all tied to your solution. Now we can walk your invoices through and adjust that as we go as we work through the process. So that's exactly what I'm demonstrating, is this Fast Track, I guess, out of the box, if you will. And so as we go through that, I'll probably kind of highlight a few things that where people sometimes make some adjustments and that type of thing. And then I'm also going to reserve enough time at the end to talk about some add-on kinds of things, other ways to expand and leverage the MetaViewer solution as well. Right? So everything centers around MetaViewer as this document management, content management, imaging type of solution. And it really is an enterprise-wide solution. Today we're going to show you how we apply that to AP as well as some of the other things at the end. But even beyond that, people use the system for order processing, customer service, contracts, HR, all kinds of different places. But if I take that technology and apply it to the challenges of processing invoices, it starts by capturing those documents as soon as they come into your organization, whether they be paper or electronic. And it's this electronic side that is a real big differentiator for us. We try to work with our clients to say, hey, let's start working with your vendors to get more and more of your vendors to email you invoices. And if you can do that, then we can set MetaViewer up to automatically watch one or multiple email boxes for those invoices as they come in. We can then prevent that paper from ever happening, and more importantly, preserve the textual information that attached invoice contains. So it goes right into the, once we do that, it goes right into the Invoice Accelerator tool that we created to intelligently read that document like you can. We extract that information out of that document. We use it to index or identify what that document's all about in MetaViewer, but ultimately we're going to push that transaction up to your Microsoft Dynamics solution. So that's really your ideal solution, because nobody has to open up mail, nobody scans anything in, everything comes into that email box, it goes right into that Invoice Accelerator, it extracts the data, and then eventually pushes that transaction up to GP without having to manually enter anything in there as well. We also realize it may not be feasible to get everything in electronic format, so we can work with paper documents as well. You can use any kind of scanner or multifunctional copier kind of device to scan documents into MetaViewer. But if you scan a document, it is just a picture. There is no text for me to extract, and that's why we have this extra box here, scanning OCR. If we pull a document into MetaViewer and we don't find any text, we run it through this OCR process, which stands for optical character recognition. If you're not familiar with what that technology does, it basically looks at all the dots on the page, all the pixels, if you will. And any dots that are touching each other, it says, oh, that's a 1 or a 6 or a G, essentially converting that picture back into text, and then it feeds into that same tool we created, that Invoice Accelerator tool, to intelligently read that text and extract that data. Electronic documents for us don't require OCR. They go right into Accelerator because they already have text. It's just those paper documents that need that OCR to then go into an Accelerator and extract the text. Once you've extracted the text, it feeds into workflow. Most people think of workflow, they think of routing a document around from person to person, and that's a big part of the MetaViewer solution. In the Fast Track, we create two broad workflows, one dealing with the non-PO invoices and one dealing with purchase order related invoices. The non-PO workflow, that usually gets routed around for coding and approvals before we push the transaction up to Dynamics. The purchase order invoices, most people don't really want to route that around for approval. You certainly can if you'd like, but the idea is that when you created the purchase order to begin with, you were expecting that invoice to come in. So in that case, what we do is we take the purchase order number off of the invoice and then reconcile that against what's either been received or what's still open against that purchase order in Microsoft Dynamics. And then we push that transaction up to Microsoft Dynamics as well. Another big part of workflow is really data validation and being able to do things with the documents so people don't have to. So throughout the process, we're constantly interacting with your Microsoft Dynamics system to validate information, things like duplicate checks. We check into GP or Dynamics, we check into MetaViewer itself to flag things if they're duplicates and put them in an exception queue. We talk to the vendor card, pull back defaults from the vendor card, like the default coding or terms. Are they a 1099 vendor? The purchase order number, we can validate that as well. Is this a valid PO for this vendor? Has it been received in Dynamics? All those kinds of checks and balances we do automatically. If everything passes, it continues to flow through those workflows. If it fails validation, it's going to get kicked to an exception queue. Somebody can go in there and look at it and decide, okay, what are we going to do with this invoice then? Retrieval being the third aspect of the solution, that's just giving everybody access to the documents when and where they need them. Big advantage for us is there's no software to load on everybody's workstation. We just use the standard internet browser to talk to the MetaViewer server, whether you choose to install MetaViewer on your servers in your organization, or we can actually host your MetaViewer solution as well, or kind of a place where we're seeing kind of grow in popularity as more clients are contracting with a hosting facility on their own, and so we can install MetaViewer in the hosting facility that you choose as well. And then it's really, in any of those cases, it's still that standard internet browser that's going to talk to MetaViewer to participate in those workflows and search for documents as needed. That internet browser is mobile friendly, so what that means is if I log into MetaViewer on a smaller device like a phone or a tablet, the system's going to sense that what kind of device I'm on, and it's going to adjust my view, so it's very easy to navigate all the information on that smaller device like a phone or a tablet. And then to take retrieval another step further, for those users who maybe spend a great deal of their day in Microsoft Dynamics, we can put buttons on the various screens within Microsoft Dynamics so that while you're looking at that transaction, you can click a button. It's going to feed MetaViewer data from that active screen, execute a search for you automatically, and then in a second or so, that document's going to be presented side by side with your Microsoft Dynamics screen there. So really the purpose for that was that we didn't want you to have to go open our browser and then rekey the information you're already looking for. It's just easier to click that button and see that document. And that's really important because as that document flowed through workflow, we tracked an audit trail of who touched that document on what date and time, and so you can see that history of where that document's all been, who coded it, who approved it, and so on, and if did they put notes on that document, and so on. So being able to link directly from your Microsoft Dynamics screen, the document is still stored in MetaViewer, but you have that easy link to retrieve that document. Okay, so that's the overview. Now I'm going to jump over to my virtual machine and start processing some documents. All right, so in my virtual machine here, up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see I have Microsoft Dynamics GP open over there. I have some documents sitting in a folder here in the lower right. I'm going to kick off a task that's going to start watching that folder. Now, normally you don't have to kick tasks off like that. In demo mode, I like to do that because otherwise there wouldn't be anything in this folder for you to look at. Now that I kick that task off, you can see it pulled those documents in. They're going right into Invoice Accelerator, so we can read those documents and extract the data from those documents. Now that I have that task running, if I scan a document to this folder, drag and drop a document in here or save a document in there, it's going to automatically pull that document in and process it just like the others. Okay. So if I open up my browser now, when I log into MetaViewer, I'm taken to my home page. As you see here, we work off of a roles-based system. In this particular user, I think in the fast track we have 10, 12, 15 different roles, pre-built roles in there. I think I've given this user quite a few of those roles, and so they're authorized to see and do a lot of things on their home page here. I'm going to refresh my browser, and it's going to update with all the numbers there are going to update with the documents that I just pulled in. So here we go. Now we can see, so I had a bunch of zeros after some of these Qs. Now I have a 17, a 3, an 8, and a 1, etc. That basically, the ones with the numbers, those are my work queues. My role says that when things change from a 0 to an 8 or a 17, there's something in there that needs my attention. So this is kind of that dashboard for me. If everything's zeros, then there's really nothing for me to do in MetaViewer. If things change to some of the other numbers, then I need to go into those workflow queues. So what we're going to do today is we're going to follow these invoices through. I'm going to route around the non-PO invoices first. Then I'm going to come back and show how the purchase order invoices are just a little bit different. And then we're going to go over to GP and look at the transactions that we push over there. Aside from the work queues, I also have some queries here, ones without the numbers. Those are kind of more searches. So instead of having to walk down the hall and dig around in file cabinets or hunt on whose desk it's sitting, I can actually execute one of those. It'll actually prompt me for some parameters like vendor number, invoice number, purchase order number, something like that. And then in a second, it's going to go out and find me the document that I need without me having to walk around and hunt for those documents. So everything is very easily accessible right from my desktop home page here in MetaViewer. All right. So you can see here that when invoices come into the organization, they go through that accelerator. We extract the data. And then they show up in these verification queues up here. You see non-PO verification. I have 8 documents in there. I have 8 in the PO verification and 1 in PO verify shipment invoice. I'll talk about all 3 of those today. The non-PO, we'll start with those. So I click this non-PO verification, and that drills me down into those 8 documents. What I'm looking at here is really the equivalent of that person who just opened up the mail. They got this big stack of invoices in front of them, and they say, oh, I want this one to go to Sally. I want this one to go to John. I want this one to go to Joe. So, but the advantage of using MetaViewer is I have an electronic stack. I can see a sample of everything that's in here. I can resort this by clicking on any of the headers to sort from low to high or high to low to have this laid out to my own personal preferences. So for example, if I wanted our company name over here on the left, I can drag that over there. If I want to make vendor name field a little bit bigger, I can increase the size of that. And I can even hide fields that I don't really care about by unchecking them. And my browser will remember my preferences, so the next time I come in here, everything will be set exactly the way that I want it. Now I'm going to click on the first document here, and we'll start processing some of these documents. All right, so what you're looking at here, resize this a little bit. On the right-hand side, yeah, obviously that's the document. On the upper part, that is the information that we extracted with Invoice Accelerator. We picked who the vendor was, and we went and talked to the vendor card and pulled back some additional information, what the vendor number is, tax schedules, if you use those. We use those to validate some taxes in the process. Payment terms, from that we calculate a due date, discount date, early pay discount. Are they a 1099 vendor, yes or no? So we can account for that in the workflow. Below the header information there is a grid with the default account codes. So if you set up account codes in your default vendor card, in this particular case it's set up in GP's vendor card, we actually pull those back and automatically code the invoice. So you can see the pay, tax, and purchase accounts, and we apply the appropriate amounts to those. In GP, where that's set up, is if I were to go into my vendor maintenance and pick a vendor here, in the account section here, this is where you establish for each vendor, you can establish the default accounts. And so we're pulling the tax and the freight, the miscellaneous or purchase accounts back from that area. If you don't have those set up, you can either manually enter the coding, or even if I do have it set up like this is, I can edit this information, or I can add additional rows. So if I click add row, I type a first few characters of an account number, and it talks directly to Microsoft Dynamics to show me a list of account codes that begin with those first few characters that I keyed in there. Now I can either select from the list, or I just keep typing till I get to the one I want, and when I do, I tab off. And then just like in GP, I can say what type, or I can just simply type perch, tab off. I'm going to key another $100. And because I automatically coded this invoice, the system did, everything was in balance before. Now I added another $100, so in the bottom right, I have a difference of $100. So I'm going to come in here and make this purchase account $100 less to tie out my invoice. Now, if I want to send this to Joe, I don't have to walk it down the hall and give it to him. I don't have to scan it and email it to him. All I have to do is where it says Approver Primary here, I can click a drop down and see all the available approvers in my system, or just like that account code, if I start typing, it shrinks till I get to the one I want, and then I click the coded button up top here, and immediately it's sent to Joe's queue. Now in the fast track, a couple things that we do. We can use email to notify somebody that something needs their attention. We chose not to send an email for every invoice that comes in. That gets to be a little bit overbearing and probably loses efficiency a little bit. So instead what we do is once or twice a day, depending on the client, we can actually have the system check everybody's queue, and anybody that has invoices in their approval queue will get an email from MetaViewer that says you have X number of invoices to process, and we're going to give them a little hyperlink right in the body of that email. They can click it. It will fire up their browser, take them right to their approval queue so they can approve those invoices. All right, so I'm going to assign a few more to Joe here so we can go look at his queue and see what he has to do. A couple other things to point out here. Above the invoice itself is a tab called Related Documents. In there, I can actually attach related documents on the fly if I want, or I have this View Supporting Documents. You can see I have a little 1 after it. That tells me that there's something in the supporting document archives that matches this invoice by vendor number, invoice number, or purchase order number by default. So if I click on that, since I only have one document, it's going to open that document up for me. If I had multiples, it would show me a list, and then I'd pick which one that I want to look at. So here's a good example. This one qualified because this is the W-9, and it shares the same vendor number as that invoice. So we automatically linked this to those invoices when they come in. Also, like I can adjust that list view to my personal preferences, I can adjust my view of invoices and documents in the system by work queue to my preferences too. So for example, this case, I probably want to move that over. I don't really need all that real estate taken up by the header fields. I can shrink those down into a single column, and now I can see a little bit bigger image of the document. We also have the ability to, we have multiple preset layouts that you can select from, including at the bottom here, I have a couple different choices for using it with dual monitors. So I can actually have the document on one monitor and all my data on another, and better lay that information out for me. Okay, so you'll see a few different views as we walk documents through the system. Okay, so we'll route that to Joe. I'll click Coded and send that to Joe. Okay, another capability when working with documents is the ability to add notes to a document. So if I look down at the bottom here, I'll make this a little bigger. You can see here if I click Add, I can type a test note in here, and I can make the font different colors or sizes or highlight it. But when I add a note, it automatically stamps my username and date and time that I created that note. This is that audit trail area that as this document flows through workflow, we're also, anytime somebody clicks a button on the document, we're going to add an entry in here. So when we see these documents downstream, you're going to see things like coded by AP user, approved by Joe, approved by Sally, and so on. So I'm going to assign this one to Joe and say coded. And now let's go look at Joe and see those invoices. I sent 3 invoices. Let's see what they look like for him. All right, so Joe's role in the organization is a lot simpler than my AP user. He's only authorized to approve some invoices and do a little bit of light duty searching, and that's all he's allowed to do. So you can see here, my approval is primary. He's got 3 documents sitting in that queue. If he opens that up, he sees that list view. He can actually adjust this just like we did in the verify queue. If he opens this up, now we can control by the user what they are authorized to do when looking at a document. So in this case, we've actually hidden some fields that aren't really pertinent for the approver, and we've made most of the fields read-only. So he can't change the vendor name or number or invoice number or things like that. He's not authorized to do that. In this view, I've also I've decided to show the coding, but I made this read-only as well. If he wants this changed, he can have a button as you see up top here that says recode. It would prompt him for a reason as to why he wants it recoded, and then that would send that back to the coder so that they could recode it per his instructions. That note would then be put in the audit trail area down here where we put that test note, and you can see here coded and verified by AP user. and then so that note would be entered in there. Now this is a little bit different. Every organization works things a little bit differently. Some organizations want their approvers to do the coding. So in that case, that first verify step, we can remove the grid for the coding and then make this grid active like it was in that first case to be editable. Other organizations, they want AP to pre-code it like we did, but they want the approver to be able to edit these codes. And so we can make this grid editable just like it was in the first step as well. In that case, we probably wouldn't need the recode button, so we would get rid of that as well. All right, so if I were an approver and I had a piece of paper in front of me, what could I do with it? I could approve it and send it and walk it back down the hall and give it to AP. I could approve it, walk it down the hall and give it to my boss because I think they should look at it as well. Or I could walk it to AP and say, hey, you know what, I don't know what this is for, so I could reject it or and give it to somebody else. Or I could say, hey, we shouldn't pay this and reject that invoice as well. So I have buttons for all those actions right up here on the top. So approve, if I click approve, it will stamp my approval and send that back immediately to AP for final review before they upload that to GP. Approve escalate, I can change my name to my boss and say approve escalate, and then instead of going back to AP, it's going to go to my boss. Now that's another thing that people ask us to automate. They say, hey, we've got certain business rules that if it's a certain type of invoice or it's over a certain dollar amount, we automatically need that escalated. And if you can help us build a table that describes what your rules are, we can build that into the workflow as well, and then you may not need this approve escalate button. You could click approve. It then compares that document to your business rules to decide where does this go next. Does it go back to AP for final review, or does it need to be escalated to Sally or Joe or somebody else? And so we can build that into the product as well. All right. The last aspect here, I have a button for reject and reassign. Similar, reject would say, hey, you know what, I know what this is for, but I don't think we should pay it. So it prompts me for a reason as to why I reject it, and then it goes into a reject bin so that AP can take a peek at it and decide what are they going to do about it. Reassign is similar, other than the fact that it's probably, I got this and I'm not really sure what this is for. So I could pick somebody else to give it to, or if I say unknown and click the reassign button, it removes it from my queue and sends that back to AP for somebody to be given to somebody else. Okay, you can see I've reached the end of my documents. Let's go back to my AP user and see where everything's at. Okay, so logging back as AP. Up top here, AP non-PO final review. I have one document sitting in that queue. That's the one that Joe just approved. Down here in the AP manager grouping of queries, it says all invoices awaiting for approval. I have two of them. The one that I approved and escalated to Sally, plus the one that I said reassign. Technically, that's still out for approval. We just don't know who yet. So that document is also sitting in this queue over here on the left, assign approver. You can see the one document there. If I open that up, I see that document here. And in that journal area, that notes area, I can see coded and verified by AP user, reassigned to unknown by Joe. Obviously, I don't want to give it back to Joe, so I'm going to say give this to Sally and click assign. Okay, so really just kind of routing things around by clicking buttons and looking at them in your queues. I don't have to walk them around and risk losing those documents on somebody's desk. If we go look at Sally now, she's going to have a lot of similar capabilities to what Joe had. On her home page, she's got her approval queues and the searching there. She opens up those two documents in her primary queue. We can see in that audit trail, you know, approved and escalated to Sally approver by Joe. So I see that entry there. You can see this is a different view or a different layout that Sally chose to use. I like this default layout, but I would probably drag, my personal preference is I would drag that bar over a little bit to give a two-column layout here as opposed to a single column. And I can still have enough room for to see my grid and the document and everything else. And I can actually see those supporting document links down here at the bottom as opposed to up on that tab. So just again, personal preferences, everybody likes the things a little bit differently. So you get to choose how you like the product to lay out the images. But she has the same buttons, approve, escalate, reassign, reject, recode, etc. Let's approve both of those invoices, these invoices here, and route those down to final review. All right, log out. Go back in as my AP user. So now I have 3 documents sitting in this final non-PO final review. If I open those up, this gives AP one last chance to review everything before we push that transaction up to GP. If I open this up, in this case, we do allow the AP user to edit some more of the information again. They could change vendors and those types of things. This allows them with the Reassign button to send it back up to the approver. If they had a note, they could add a note and send it back up to them, or they could send it to another approver. If they want somebody else's opinion as to what to do with this, they can route that around accordingly. Otherwise, if everything looks good, they can click the export button here, and then we send that transaction up to GP. Okay, so I'm going to export all 3 of these so we can look at those over in GP in a little bit. We'll export that one as well. All right, going back to my home page. Those 3 documents are no longer in final review. They are now sitting in this waiting for payment info from ERP. You see I have 6 documents in there. I had 3 to start the day, and I just sent those other 3 documents up. What that queue is used for is once we hand the transaction off to GP or Microsoft Dynamics in general, we're going to periodically ping Microsoft Dynamics to say, hey, is there any payment information applied to that transaction? If so, we can index the document or pull that information back to index that document on the payment information as well. So then I can actually execute something like this search paid invoices here. And then it could prompt me for something like a payment number, 20058. I can enter that, and I can see all the invoices paid with that payment number, even though you applied that in GP as opposed to directly in MetaViewer. We sync up, and we can pull that information back, so it helps in the searching and reporting against the documents that are in MetaViewer. Okay. So before we go look at those transactions in GP, let's look at the purchase order side of things. So just a little bit different. This PO verification, if I click on that, we've got 8 documents in there. Same thing, I can adjust this as to my personal preferences. But if I open up this document, the layout is a little bit different than the non-PO side. Again, I'm going to kind of move this over here a little bit to give myself a little bit more room. If I take it even further yet, I can actually get 3 columns if I really like that view as opposed to just the 2-column view. So instead, the grid, instead of the GL information, what we do on purchase order invoices is we take the purchase order number that we extracted off the invoice, talk to Dynamics and say, hey, what's been received against this purchase order? And so you can see the grid shows receipt 1165. We got 20 red shirts and 15 yellow shirts. And I compare those to the total of the invoice, and in the bottom right, I'm off by $75. If I actually look at this invoice up here, you can see this is an invoice for red shirts. Well, it looks like we didn't get invoice for the yellow shirts yet. So if I erase that yellow shirt item, it erases it because it doesn't apply to this invoice, and presumably we'll get another invoice that will be for the yellow shirts, and then those yellow shirts will be then received against that invoice as opposed to this one. So now that I tie out, I click the reconcile, and that sends that for final review to be reviewed before we push that transaction up to Microsoft Dynamics. This one's a perfect match. Everything is 0. I can just click reconcile and release it. Other capabilities that we have across the top for buttons with purchase orders are send to purchasing. If there's a problem with this and I want somebody to take a peek at it, I could do that. I could route it for approval if I want. Or processes non-PO. That gets used if this comes in and the purchase order number is like Doug or something like that. It's not really a valid PO. I can click that, and it'll actually then send that over to the non-PO queue. Okay. So those 2 documents are in this non-PO final review. Let's look at this PO verify shipment invoice right here If I open that up, in some organizations, in GP anyways, those organizations want to receive the goods at the same time as the invoice comes in. And so this is how you do that in GP. The grid, instead of pulling back what's been received against the purchase order, it pulls back what's still open. And so I've got 4 brochures and 6 yellow shoes. Again, I'm off on this one because this invoice is for 4 brochures and 4 yellow shoes. So I'm going to decrease my quantity of yellow shoes to 4 to tie this out, and then say reconciled. Okay, so just kind of doing everything right here in your browser, and then routing things around. And if I go back to my home page here, I have PO Finder Review, I have 2, in that shipment invoice I have 1. So I'm going to open those up and quickly send those over to GP. In my demo system, I actually gave myself a little shortcut to just export them from this list view. Normally you would open those up and review those in the system. So I can actually hop from queue to queue as well. So for example, if I hover over this MetaViewer logo, it actually brings a pop-out that shows me everything that's on my home page, and I can scroll down here. So if I wanted to jump over to one of the other review queues, I can click on that and go from one queue to the other. So I don't have to always go back to my home page. I've been going back there just to show the visibility of where everything's at, but I can jump from space to space here. So I'm going to export this one as well. All right. So back to my home page. I now have 9 documents waiting for payment info from ERP. I've pushed 6 transactions up to GP. So let's minimize my browser and go over to GP. Payables transaction entry, purchasing invoice entry, and receiving transaction entry. That's where the transactions are going to go. We push those up as batches. So if I click on batches, for example, and I can see the batch, by default, we're calling it MVR for MetaViewer in today's date. So everything would go up with today's date, all into the same batch. That varies from client to client. We have some variability of what we call batches. Some people want the coder's initials or the final reviewer's initials and the posting date. There's some variability in there. In GP, I think the max that field can be is 15 characters. So we just have to be careful not to make a batch that's going to be larger than 15 characters. But I can select that batch, and you can see here I've got 3 transactions that total just under $12,000. I could post this entire batch from here, or if I wanted to look at the transactions, I can click on transactions, and you can see here's that Gardener Services invoice. The distributions, if I click on that, this is where we push the information that was in the grid. I can see that information as well. If I want to see the document in MetaViewer, I have a menu item on my GP screen that says additional. If I click on that, I see MetaViewer invoice. If I click that, it actually executes a search for me using the data that's on this screen here. And you can see there is the Gardener Services invoice. If I click on the blue bar here, you can see this is the one with that test note, coded and verified by AP, approved by Joe, final review by AP. I see that history that's there. Okay. Now, one of the neat things in GP is that if I navigate to another document, the data on my screen changes, so my browser re-executes the search using that new data. So now we're looking at the Metro Business Equipment invoice. Now we're looking at the West Junction invoice. Okay. The other invoices, purchase invoice entry. In the other flavors of Dynamics, some all go to the same place. In GP, your purchase order invoices go to a different place than your non-PO invoices. AX is the same way. In this case, if I open up, here's the Lobsters invoice, and my browser refreshes, I do have that additional button here with the MetaViewer invoice as well. So there's the Lobsters invoice, my Red Shirts invoice, and so on. All right, so that's the basics of the system. We capture the documents, we intelligently read and extract the data with our Invoice Accelerator tool. They go through workflows. We're validating information and interacting with Microsoft Dynamics throughout the process. The non-PO invoices get routed around and GL coded. The purchase order invoices get reconciled against what's either open or received against that purchase order in Dynamics. We then have various ways to push the transaction up to Microsoft Dynamics, and then we can link back to that document from your Dynamics screen. So really kind of ties out the process. Before I go over to questions, I'm going to kind of jump over to a different user and show you some of the other kinds of things that we can do with the system. So similar to invoice processing and processing those around, as I said in the overview, there's a lot of other things that you can do with it. You can take those same concepts and apply those to other aspects of your organization. So I've got a user here that I've added some of those extra capabilities, and I'll just kind of walk you through a couple of them real briefly here. Check batch approval. This is one that's pretty popular. I can actually, if I go into in GP, for example, and I create my check batch, so if I opened up a check batch, this MetaViewer check run here, and schedule all these to be paid, I can actually save that check edit list to a folder that MetaViewer then can pull that check edit list in, and that's where this document is here. If I open that check edit list in my browser here, this can be assigned to somebody to approve this payment. So you can see here's the payment schedule, this MetaViewer check run. We pull it in, we index it on the check run, we say what is the payment date, what is the payment amount. I can say who do I want this to approve, or if everything gets approved by the same person, we could default that and really skip that step. But the grid below the invoice, we pulled back all the invoices that are included in this payment. So you can see I've got 3 invoices here for 2 different vendors, and we have a link right to those invoices. So if I wanted to see this Kruger invoice, for example, I can click that view invoice, and then it drills me down and shows me that invoice, and I would be able to see, you know, who coded it, who approved it. I get to see all that information on that document. If I had any questions, I link everything there. If I send this to my approver, my approver's view, whoops, where am I at? Check batch approval, on that one. They have the ability to approve at the line level. We can do this at the invoice level too. So where I've got these little green checks and X's, I can approve everything by clicking on the top, or I can say I want to reject that one, and I want to add a note here, pay this next run, right? And I can do all my approvals. I say approve, and then I could route that to a queue that somebody then compares that to the payment batch and decides, oh, okay, we're gonna not pay these 2 invoices or whatever, and then works that way. So just a different document type, same kind of concepts. We can route it around for everybody to look at it. We can have grids that display different information. Like in that case, we're displaying all the invoices on that check edit list. All right, expense report. That's another popular one, to where you can actually use MetaViewer as your form. Before we had, in other companies that I've worked for, you know, I used to fill out a spreadsheet with all my expenses, and then I'd staple all my receipts to it and give it to my boss for signing. In this case, we can use MetaViewer, so I don't have to create that paper, and then once it's all been approved, we can push that transaction up to GP. So I can click on a shortcut like this that says create expense report. And this is just kind of a general idea. You know, you may want to track different things than what I have here. But up top here, it basically creates a new document in the system. And I come in here and I put in my name, Doug Approver. And approval required, I want to give it to my boss. Customer visited, Metafile. Is it reimbursable? No. Start date. We'll say that was last Thursday, and that we went there. Pay amount, I'm going to leave that blank for now. Below the header information is a grid where I enter my receipts. So I say add row. Receipt date, we'll say on the 4th. Expense type, I have different things, meals, lodging, mileage, etc. So I say lodging, and then in the amount I say 152.36. And if I enter another line and say mileage this time, if I put in my miles of 256 miles, it can automatically calculate what my mileage amount is based on the parameter that we store in the system as to what is your mileage rate, and that can be adjusted, as that changes, or your some people will have per diems and those types of things. So you key all your expenses in there. At the bottom, it's tallied up, $280.36. So I know that I want to put in my pay amount here $280.36 to tie that out. And add pages, this is where I would add my receipts. So if I say add pages, I can browse, and if I go to sample docs, receipts, if I scanned a bunch of receipts, I can drag them and drop them like that, or I could just select them and say okay. And then when I say upload pages, you can see there's some receipts that I scanned in. There's the other page of receipts. Now I submit this, it routes it to my boss, and so on, kind of like the invoice processing side of things. You can kind of route those around for approvals and so on. Okay, some other things. Just real quick, requisitions. You can create a requisition. So to aid the purchase order side of things, you can route that around like the expense report. You fill in what you're ordering. You can attach a quote, get all your approvals, and then we can actually create the requisition in GP, which then you can turn into a purchase order there. Other things, journal entries, creating new vendors. You could route those around for approvals as needed, creating new vendors, and then we can actually upload and create the new vendor into GP or Dynamics. Intercompany transactions. Some organizations want to split an invoice to multiple companies. We can do that as well. So those are some of the other things that we can kind of expand the same concepts to other areas. As I said in the overview too, HR, contracts, order processing, customer service, lots of other capabilities to be able to do those kinds of things in the product as well. The last thing I'll touch on before we jump over to the questions is reporting. All of our data that we extract and interact with GP on is all stored in our SQL databases. So using a tool like SSRS, SQL Server Reporting Services, Microsoft's tool, you can actually build reports to analyze and view the data that's either in MetaViewer or in GP, or maybe a combination of both. And I just created a few sample reports here. So you can see this invoice accruals, for example. If I click that, I can actually put shortcuts to those reports on my MetaViewer homepage. So when I click it, it executes and shows me the SQL report that I developed that says invoice accruals. This actually shows me everything that's in MetaViewer that we have not handed off to GP yet. And I set a default begin and end date, but you could edit for which month that you're looking for. And then I can see what step they're in. I can see a summary of that data. I can see I've got a little under $185,000 worth of invoices that qualified in this report, and I can put hyperlinks right embedded into that report. So you can see if I wanted to see this Beaumont construction invoice, for example, I click that link, just like our related document link or that link within GP. It's going to execute a search for me using the parameters from that report, and then I see that Beaumont construction invoice. And it also works with that, whoops, I didn't want to do that. It also works that if I run a report like this, I could export that to Excel, and then all that data will go over there. That hyperlink would actually go to the Excel spreadsheet as well. And it is still safe and secure, because if I click that link, it then fires up my browser to execute that search, and then I get authenticated as my browser opens. If I'm not authorized to see that document, I click that link, it's going to come up in the browser and say, hey, you're not authorized to see that document. So it's still secure even if I export those hyperlinks to Excel, a PDF or a Word document. I can use hyperlinks like that as well. Okay, so I think that gives a good overview for today. It's probably enough information for one day. Ashley, I'll have you come back on the line and ask if there's any questions. While you do that, I'm also going to put up this PowerPoint again and bring this up. If you do have other questions or want to set up a web demo with us, you can reach out to your Interdyne BMI rep, and they will get you appointed into either myself or the correct regional account manager to help you with that. Or other questions, you can email us at info@metafile.com, or again, you can reach out to your Interdyne BMI sales rep, and they will know how to get you in touch with us as well.
Thanks, Doug.
Ashley?
Thanks. Yeah, it doesn't look like we had any questions come through, so that must mean that you covered everything flawlessly.
Well, I doubt that, but like I said, info@metafile.com or your Interdyne BMI rep can certainly get you in touch with us, and we'd be certainly happy to do a demo for you guys. And actually, that's kind of nice too, because then we don't have to mute the lines, and everybody can kind of interact as we go through the process. You can answer questions. We can reserve as much time. Like I said, we had an hour today, or a little under an hour. I can generally hit it in an hour. I don't know whether I talk fast today or not, but if you wanted more time, we can certainly give you as much time as you need. So I can sit here for a little bit. If you guys do have questions, you can kind of add a question. Otherwise, we can give you a little bit of time back in your day to get some other productive stuff done.
I'm looking now. It looks like we might have a hand raised. 1 second.
Okay.
All right, maybe not.
Okay. Well, like I said, not a big deal. If you do have questions, certainly shoot us an email or reach out to Interdyne BMI, and we'll definitely get everything answered.
Oh, Doug, sorry.
Yep,
can you show an approval email?
I cannot. I don't really have, because my demo VMs aren't really connected to an email system, so they don't really do that. I wonder how I could get one. It's fairly straightforward. I mean, basically, it would say, like I said, it would just be a couple, and you can actually design it however you want. That's kind of the flexibility of the system. You would use like an HTML creator to be able to say, how do you want that laid out? You can have, it could be a simple text email, or it could have some pictures and things like that in it if you wanted to make it fancy. But essentially, it's going to do just that. It's going to say you have X number of invoices to approve, and then it'll have a little hyperlink right in the body that then they click it, it fires up in their browser. So it can really look like whatever you want it to look like. I think we have a normal one. That's actually a good question. I'll see if I can't get a copy in for future needs. I've never been asked that before, but I could certainly get a screenshot of one, if nothing else, just to be able to show that.
Okay, and can you batch the approval request to approvers?
Batch the approval request. I don't think we usually do that. So like if I verify it and I say approve, it immediately goes to their queue. I don't kind of wait. I guess I could, but I'm not sure why I would want to. If I wanted to go to the approver, I want it to just go there right now, but I could, we do have a processing task that typically is running every so often that says, okay, now move, send these to the approver. So we could kind of just delay that, I guess, if you just wanted it to only get routed over at certain times a day. But typically it's generally kind of moving it along right in line.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and that looks like that's all for the questions today.
All right. Well, thanks, Ashley. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and let us know how we can help.
Yeah, thank you. And on behalf of everyone at Interdyne BMI and Metafile, we'd like to thank you for your attendance, and have a great rest of your day.